I think I also missed, like, while you were frozen, am I affirmative or negative?
Oh, okay, so Cassandra's affirmative and Chase is negative. All right, so I just pasted the prompts here, so that would make Chase your decision to cross out the topic first.
Um, I will strike the second one.
All right, and Cassandra.
I'll strike the internet has done more harm than good.
All right, so that would mean Chase, you crossed out the third one, right?
I thought he did virtual
Second.
learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So that would make our topic trade schools are preferable to higher education. So Cassandra, you're going to be arguing that trade schools are preferable to higher education, and Chase, you're going to be saying that trade schools are not preferable to higher education. So I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes for prep, and I'm going to start that timer now. I'm so sorry, I was on mute. That gives us our time up for prep. So let's see. All right. That means Cassandra, you're going to be up first on the affirmative. You have 2 minutes to give your opening statement. Just as a reminder, so what I'm going to do is when you guys have 20 seconds left out of your 2 minute mark, I'm going to hold up like a little two, just so you guys know that there's 20 seconds. But otherwise, Cassandra, whenever you start speaking, I'll start your timer.
Right. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here in the final round. Today, I stand in affirmation of this resolution. Trade schools are preferable to higher education. First, I want to make sure we're on this all on the same page. That higher ed, I'm considering to mean a 4-year bachelor's degree, and not actually necessarily graduate school. Because in common conversation, when we talk about higher ed, we are talking about that next step after high school, the bachelor's degree. I think this debate should be judged in terms of maximum and most immediate benefit for our students. And on that assumption, trade schools are preferable to higher education for two reasons. One is that they actually receive arguably a higher quality of education with a more immediate benefit. In trade schools, you're there to learn a trade, a career, and your instructors are often experts in their fields. Whereas at a college or four-year university, your instructors are not necessarily experts in their field. They're experts in their field. Well, they're not experts in the field that you're trying to learn how to do. They're experts in their field, which is teaching, which is academia. They're academics. They're not necessarily people out there doing what you're trying to learn to do every day. And so some of their practical knowledge may very well be out of date, or they may not be in practice doing those things. The second reason is that in our modern society, a four-year college degree has basically become an extension of high school. We have general education requirements. It's a broad learning base. And most of the practical value that you get from a college
2
education.
minutes are up. Sorry, the 2-minute timer's up. Did you see the 20 seconds I was holding up?
I did. I must have missed it, but that's okay.
Wait, no, that might not be your fault. On the Zoom thing, are you able to see everyone's videos all at once, or is it just showing like one or two people?
Oh, you know what? Yeah. I should like pin you. Okay, well now I have you pinned.
All right, no worries. Not a big deal at all. But you're good. And let me stop the timer. Okay. All right, if you're okay with moving, are you okay with moving on to the next speaker?
I can be, yeah.
Right. So Chase, we're gonna have you go up next with your opening statement, and I'm gonna start the 2-minute timer as soon as you start talking, but make sure you can see me as well so I can hold up the 20-second reminder.
Okay.
All right, so whenever you're ready, I'll start timing.
Okay, first I want to thank everyone for being here. Good job, Cassandra, on your opening statement. Thank you, judges, for being here. I stand here to argue that trade school is not preferable to higher education. And regardless of the fact that I have personally benefited from having an uncle who can do my plumbing whenever it goes awry, I think there are three very solid reasons for why higher education or why trade school is not preferable to higher education. The first being that higher education leads to higher earnings. Everyone who goes to college, if you get a good solid STEM degree or even a business degree, you're going to make more than somebody who goes to trade school, especially in the long run. You're going to have a higher salary once you get out. The second main reason is because higher education has more options than trade school. Trade school, you're going to be limited to, working with your hands and doing the trades. Versus higher education, you can learn about anything and you can get a career in pretty much anything, be it in business, as an engineer, some sort of research assistant. I mean, the possibilities are basically endless. The third reason that higher education is better than trade school is because higher education leads to careers that are safer and that you can do for longer. If you're in a trade, odds are your back's going to be hurt after 20 years and your skin's going to be wrinkly because you've been out in the sun all day. Versus if you go and get a career through higher education, you're going to be sitting normally in an office where it's air conditioned and it's safe and it's comfortable, and that's a great environment for most people to work in. So for these three reasons, higher earnings, more options, and safer and longer lasting careers, trade school and the careers that it leads to is not preferable than higher education.
All right, great. Thank you, Chase. So that was our opening statement. So I'm going to start a timer soon for our open crossfire. So one of you guys can start talking, and as soon as you start talking, I'm going to start the 2-minute timer, okay? And I'm going to still do the 20 seconds warning.
So Chase, I have a pretty urgent question. If higher education is better and more desirable for preferable for everybody because we have easier jobs, longer lasting jobs, who's going to do the trade school jobs? We don't have the technology yet to have robots doing all those things. And it's a lot of people in the trades who are going to make that kind of robotics a reality.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think it's important to distinguish here that the prompt doesn't say that higher education is the only important school or that it's even the most important school. It simply says that it's preferable. So when I look at the prompt, I think of if, let's say I'm somebody coming out of high school, what's preferable for me on average? So for the average high school student, these careers that higher education leads to is going to be preferable. Not in every case, but on average. Question I had for you, Cassandra, was in your first point about professors, not providing better education in your field that you're studying, but rather they're teachers, right? So what I don't know what college or education experience you have, but I can say in my own experience that most of my professors had to attain some sort of professional experience and then pivot into a teaching career. Is this something that you're familiar with or something that you've personally experienced?
Not exactly. I mean, in my experience, and I have a lot of friends in academia, the general career path for a lot of professors are four-year college, graduate school, some sort of fellowship, and then trying to find research positions that segue into professorship.
May I ask what area that they're professing in? Is it in academia?
What about, music, public health, um,
That would
uh,
mark the end of our crossfire period. Sorry, guys. Okay. So now that our open crossfire is done, we're going to go back into closing statements. So Cassandra, whenever you're ready and you start talking, I'll start your 2-minute timer for closing statements.
Um, so thank you, Chase, for a good cross-examination. Before I go back to my own points, I want to hit on a couple of things that Chase mentioned in his speech. One is that higher education degrees lead to higher earnings, but that is demonstrably untrue. The average electrician salary is $60,000 a year, and the average musician salary is only 44. I myself was a music major, and most professional orchestra members do have degrees from prestigious universities. And the point that kind of builds off of that is, are we talking about net pay? Because higher education comes with a much higher price tag and a good 10 to 30 years in debt. So I don't think we can really say that higher education does lead to higher earnings, at least not in your take home. So to return to my original points, that the trade schools are urgently needed, meaning that these students are going to have a much easier time finding a job. The job market for people with just general bachelor's degrees is completely flooded. I can speak to that from personal experience. I ended up working for myself as an SAT tutor because everyone else had the same degree that I did. Whereas the trade schools are training people in essential work. Everyone needs a plumber. Everyone needs an electrician at some point. Everyone needs these everyday jobs. And so these students are going to come out with a much easier job market, lower debt, and like I said, arguably a better education, having learned from experts who are out there doing it every day. In fact, most trade schools advertise that their students go out and get a job within 10 to 24 months of graduation. Whereas, again, from personal experience, it took me a good 5 years to go out and find a job. And I didn't even find a job. I had to make a job. I
Right.
had to work for
That
myself.
marks the end of the 2 minutes, if that's okay. Thank you. All right, so then we're going to go into the closing statement for Chase for the negative. Chase, if you're there, I will start your timer as soon as you start talking.
Okay, thank you. First, I just want to point out that Cassandra makes some really good points and something we need to acknowledge, which is that In every case, there's going to be individual, idiosyncratic, different examples of deviation from the average, right? So in Cassandra's case, she went to higher education and it took her a while to get a good job. But my argument here is primarily interpreting the prompt as in general, right? So when Cassandra talks about trade schools, the professors there or the teachers there having a better education, that's true, but she didn't reject my point that many professors in many fields in higher education have to go get actual professional experience before they can pivot into this academic role. And when she talks about take-home pay, that's actually my main point, is that your take-home pay from education is higher. You do have to invest and take out loans normally, but in the end, it ends up paying off in the long run. So I want to highlight again my 3 reasons why trade school is not preferable to higher education. The first one being that it leads to that higher earning, as I just talked about. Your salary is going to be higher, and while you do have to invest a little bit up front, it ends up paying off in the long run. The second reason is because higher education has more options. So if you go to trade school, you might be an electrician or a plumber, versus if you go into higher education, you have a vast selection of options that you can go into, whatever piques your interest. The third reason why trade school is not preferable to higher education is because the careers that you normally get from higher education are going to be safer. You don't have to break your back doing them. You can do it up until you're 80 if you want to. You can become a CEO and do it your whole life. So for those 3 reasons, we can solidly and confidently say that trade schools are not preferable to higher education.
All right, thank you guys. All right, that marks the end of the first debate on higher education versus trade school. So our next 2 debaters are going to be Stephanie and Anthony. Stephanie, you are going to be on the affirmative, and Anthony, you're going to be on the negative. So let me paste in the prompt in the chat. All right, I just pasted it into the chat. So we have our 3 prompts. And Anthony, because you're in the negative, you get first pick of which one not to do.
Yeah. I will strike the billionaires topic, number 2.
All right. And Stephanie, you get second choice.
Um, I choose to strike the use of robots.
All right, so that would make our topic environmental rights of the future should supersede economic interests of current generations.
And sorry,
So, Stephanie, sorry,
am I
what's
the
that?
affirmative? Am I the affirmative?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So that would mean, Stephanie, you are arguing that environmental rights should supersede the economic interests of current generations. And Anthony, you're arguing that the environmental rights of the future are not as important as the economic interests of current generations. So I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes to prep your speeches. Let me open up my timer. All right, I'm starting the timer for 2 minutes now. All right, that marks 2 minutes, the end of our prep time. Okay, so now we're going to go into opening statements. We're going to have Stephanie go first and Anthony go second on the affirmative and negative. Just a reminder, so I'm going to hold up this little peace sign too for when you guys have 20 seconds left, since it's only 2 minutes allotted for each session. Make sure that you have like either a view of like everyone's video on the Zoom on, or you can pin me if you'd like, just so you can see. That being said, Stephanie, you can start whenever for your opening statement, and I'll start the timer when you start speaking.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for being here and making this possible. And I'm looking forward to this final debate. I'm arguing the affirmative that environmental rights of the future should supersede economic interests of the current generation. The definition I'm choosing for this is that environmental rights and economic rights are both important. I'm not arguing that one is not completely not important. However, environmental rights of the future generation deserve a much higher weighting in policy decisions than they are receiving today. And I have three main arguments. One is that environmental decisions we're making today are inexorably tied with health outcomes of future generations. One example we see playing out real time is the pervasive use of phthalates and plastics. Thanks to economic decisions made very recently, just 10, 20 years ago for corporations maximizing their profits, we're now seeing declining fertility across a wide variety of species, kind of preterm underweight babies, and a lot of health issues that we are slowly only beginning to entangle because the default decision in the past was that economic interests would supersede. Second, it's really hard to measure something like environmental health, but it's no less real. And just because we can measure dollars doesn't mean that economic interests are more important. For example, things like diversity of species in the world, the safety of the barrier reefs, it's really difficult to put a price tag. And just because of that, I think it's really easy to, and we have been underweighting their importance, and we need to make sure that this does not happen going forward. And the third reason, and I think maybe the strongest, is existential. If we don't have a safe planet for our great-grandchildren, then no amount of profits we have today will matter. And so for these three reasons, I urge you to vote the affirmative.
All right, thank you. So that would be our first opening statement for the affirmative. Next, we're going to go to our opening statement for the negative. So that's going to be Anthony.
Mhm.
Again, just a reminder to make sure that you're able to see my video so you can see
Sure.
my warning at the 20-second mark. Other than that, whenever you start talking, I'll start the timer.
All right. I probably negate the resolution that the environmental rights of the future should supersede the economic interests of current generations. I like to start with my opponent's last argument about the existential threat. My argument here is that we don't even get to think about that idea unless we value short-term survival. And this is not a theoretical argument. In many places across the world, people have not enjoyed the benefits of industrialization, particularly rural areas of China, much of South America, and many areas of Asia like the Philippines. The point here is that it's easy to talk about things like climate change and doomsday scenarios, but if you don't live to get to that next generation, it doesn't matter. So my argument here is that a lot of the times when people affirm this resolution, they're speaking from the United States or other developed countries that have the benefits of using natural resources in order to be able to talk about things like the Kyoto Protocol. But when we think about just basic ideas like Maslow's hierarchy of needs or Philip Zimbardo's psychology talking about time perspective, people who are super poor can't afford the affirmative because they don't have food security. They don't have plumbing. They don't have a lot of the things that we all here take for granted, where we can think about the future. Many people have to think about the current and to survive. The second point here is feasibility. My first subpoint here is that it would be great if we could affirm and do things like sustainable development and address a lot of the issues in the first 2 points of my opponent. The problem is we don't have the technology right now. Remember, the resolution talks about economic interests, which means if we prioritize economic interests, we do things like market solutions that allow us to access a lot of the things the affirmative is talking about. In particular, the first point my opponent talks about is that a lot of these issues about the environment are undervalued. That's a failure of the political system. That's a failure of politicians not upholding those economic interests. It's not the fault of current generations. Next, I would also argue that if we look at these market-based solutions, it actually allows us to address a lot of these existential issues. That if we improve technologies, if we get poor people the industrialization needed to care about the environment, we'll actually have them on our board to not just save the environment, but save themselves in the short term. I negate.
All right, thank you. So that brings us to our crossfire. I'm gonna have a 2-minute timer on for that as well. Both of you guys can just open, ask questions, and answer them, and I will still be doing the little 20-second hand signal. All right, your time for cross-examination starts now.
Steph, would you like the first question?
Sure. Anthony, in your case, how much economic benefit would you assign to another 10 years of healthy life?
Oh, that's a near impossible question, right? Like that's like I mean, courts haven't been able to do it. I don't know if I have a number or a way to measure that. My argument would be the best way we could do that is through market solutions, by which we can have people make those decisions through frankly, with their feet, right? So we already make those decisions, right? People, pay for Patagonia. People, support more environmentally oriented companies, things like that. I mean, I don't, and frankly, I don't think it's democratic for me to even answer that question, right? These are things that individuals collectively decide. And you're right that sometimes the collective decisions are short-sighted, but I would argue it's better than kind of from the top down thinking about what the future wants when we're not thinking about what people right now are trying to endure. Steph, my question to you is it's about this existential threat question. How much should the current generation sacrifice in order for the future generations to live a stronger and have a stronger environment?
Right. So, same comment back to you. It's really
Yeah.
hard to quantify these things, but my argument is against the status quo that we're not thinking enough about the next generation, and we can see that with a lot of the ways that businesses are making money today. Temu, for example, makes cheap and inexpensive clothing available to everyone. Do they
Yep.
deserve their profits? Sure. Yeah, it's benefiting somebody, but how do you put a price on the amount of plastics and waste that they're generating, and how do you think that there could be a plan to minimize this? There can't be unless we put more emphasis on environmental rights of the present and the future.
Sure. We have 10
I think
seconds.
we're
So.
just about out of time.
Yeah.
All right, so that concludes our open crossfire. Thank you, guys. And next, we're gonna go back to Stephanie for closing statements. That's gonna be 2 minutes again. Hand signal, you know the drill. So I'll start the timer whenever you start talking.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you to my opponent for some brilliant arguments and for everyone here for making this possible. Again, I want to start by addressing my opponent's points. He argues that by putting more emphasis on the environment in the future, we're stripping away economic rights for society's most vulnerable. And I would argue this is not an either or argument. What I'm arguing is that environmental rights of the future are underrated and we don't put enough time thinking about them as business owners, as policymakers. And I think there's a more thoughtful way to do business than we're currently doing. One of the other arguments he makes is that market solutions will always get us to the right point. And to that, I would say, has anyone heard of the tragedy of the commons? There is a reason that policymakers have to go in and set some guidelines for what's allowed in our food, what's allowed in our baby products, and how much waste can corporations make before there has to be penalties, because there are certain things that maximizing the current economic interest will lead to suboptimal outcomes in the long term. And we've seen this over and over again in the past. To conclude, I want to restate some of my arguments. One is that making the right long-term environmental decisions will lead to better health outcomes. And we've seen just recently and also in the past how short-term business decisions have hurt the health of the planet. I think we should minimize that. Two, just because something is hard to measure, like the health of the planet, doesn't mean we shouldn't give it equal weighting. And I think for things like the collapse of species, the safety of the planet, it's really hard to put a price tag on that. And that doesn't mean we should underweight it. And thirdly, think of the children who come after us. They have no vote today. But if we are maximizing our economic rights today, as we currently are, then there could be no planet and no safe place for them in the future. Please vote the affirmative.
All right, thank you. that would mark the end of our closing statements for Stephanie. And Anthony, your turn for closing statements. I'm going to start the timer whenever you start talking.
Got it. I agree with the main points of the affirmative, which I think is why you should negate. Let's start with the last point Steph made about thinking about the children. I agree. The problem is we don't think about the children now. Not only are we callous about them, but we're callous about future generations. Recall the examples I gave about rural China people in the Philippines, people in Latin America, places that don't have the ability to have awesome Zoom and internet like we do. A lot of the reasons they struggle and a lot of the reasons they destroy the environment is because they have no other choice. Either they starve or they use the natural resources, the limited water they have, the limited access to electricity, the limited raw building blocks of society. They have to do that now in the short term in order for them to think about the long term. We see this in many countries in Africa, right? We have things like microfinance systems. Why are those important? Because it uses economic interests to encourage people to think about the long term. So when we look at down the points that my opponent made, the first one was about the fact that we're not doing an either or scenario. I don't think this is the right argument because when you look at the word supersede in the resolution, there is a hard trade-off. Either we sacrifice the current generation. We tell places that don't have industrialization that they have to live in huts, that they live in places of food insecurity, and that they shouldn't do things like drilling and oiling and all those things. And that just doesn't work in the status quo. These are people who care about their children too, but they care about the children. These are places that have high maternity rate, losses and deaths because there's poverty, there's a lack of resources, there's a lack of nutrition, there's a lack of food. On the second point about the tragedy of the commons, I think this is a negative argument too. What is the solution to the tragedy of the commons? Is to increase the cost of each individual agent in order to do that. And that's through economic systems, not through future generations' rights. We already know this with regulations. We already know this through things like carbon taxing. We have the economic models. The problem then, all of our arguments from the affirmative are due to a political failure, not economic interests. If we change the economic structure, we actually have the ability to protect the future. Any other option is just utopian. I negate.
All right, thank you guys. So I believe that concludes both of our debates for the day. I think there was just 4 of you, right?
Mhm.
All right. So unless the other judges have any questions or like any clarifications, I think that's it for this round. So you guys should be good to go, and good luck on the final results.
Thanks, everyone. Great debate.
Thanks. Good job, everyone.
Thanks,
job.